Welcome to another broadcast of Majoring in the Majors on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. You can find them at artistfirst.com. Your host, Pastor S.J. Munson, is the author of two books, The Treasure of Israel and Christ Held Hostage, The Hijacking of Christianity. Find them wherever great books are sold. Now, here he is, your host, Pastor S.J. Munson.
Hi, this is S.J. Munson, and welcome to Majoring in the Majors. The words narcissism and narcissistic personalities are words that have been much in the forefront of public discussion in recent years, especially as they relate to authoritarian government and to one political figure in particular, you guessed it, Donald Trump. Here to discuss narcissism as it manifests in both families and in the political arena is Dr. Jocelyn Sze. She's a licensed psychologist and assistant clinical professor at University of California at Berkeley. She specializes in trauma and anxiety and is passionate about providing clinical training in culturally responsive, evidence-based psychotherapy. Her work has been published in such academic journals such as Emotion and Psychophysiology, as well as publications such as Newsweek and the Huffington Post. She's currently working on a book on emotional control in families and governments, and she serves on the board of the Bay Area Trauma Recovery Clinical Services, a nonprofit advancing trauma-focused training, research, and treatment, as well as the McCune Foundation, which supports grassroots organizations that mobilize historically excluded populations. Dr. Sze, welcome, and thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, SJ.
Now, I remember taking a introductory psych class in college and studying Freud's theory of primary and secondary narcissism, primary narcissism, of course, being the normal phase of development for toddlers, and then secondary narcissism, of course, anyone who's raised an adolescent teenager knows what that is.
That's right.
How are these phases linked to narcissistic personality disorder, or are they completely different?
I think that's such a great question to start with, to really see narcissism as a spectrum as well as a healthy part of normal human development for most people. One of my favorite findings in social psychology is this better than average effect that's very repeatable across so many studies, where when you poll drivers in the United States and ask them, are you better than average at driving? 93% of drivers report, yes, I am better than average. Same across professions. If you poll professors, are you better than average than your colleagues? 94% of college professors say, yes, I am better than average. So we do have kind of a naturally embedded thing in human nature that's trying to put a positive image first, believe in that positive image of themselves. And for toddlers, this is very adaptive to be able to have a me first ideology. For teenagers as well, in trying to rebel and establish their independence, that self-focus is part of natural development. But narcissistic personality disorder, I do distinguish as quite separate, in terms of really the distinguishing factor being the emotional control and the emotional harm that is a component of needing to save face and protect that self-image at the expense of others. We don't expect that in healthy development.
How common is this in the general population?
Yeah, I think it differs in different cultures. There's, I think, more awareness and discussion these days in terms of the United States is one of the more individualistic cultures, and we as a society are favoring certain qualities like strength and projecting a very strong image to others and standing out, versus other cultures are really not focusing as much as standing out amidst a crowd. But my knowledge of this is about 3%, somewhere in that range, where we see some of these more problematic narcissistic personalities. But it's certainly not the majority. It's not everywhere.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Now, you work with patients who've grown up in various systems of emotional control and manipulation. How does narcissism manifest itself, particularly in families, and what are the signs that someone has grown up in such a system?
Yeah, that is such a good question, and I think as I reflect on this, what's really tricky about narcissistic personality disorder, let's say, is a lot of the signs are difficult to detect. So I think just even starting with defining terms, the term that's most relevant to understand would be emotional control or emotional abuse. And not everyone with narcissistic personality disorder ends up exacting emotional abuse on their loved ones. Many do, so I think that's the term just to start with. And why it's trickier to detect is that emotional abuse does not involve ever laying a hand on someone. And so you don't have this big bruise on your face where other people are aware and can identify what's going on. This is much more invisible. And the way that I define emotional abuse is that it involves attempts to control, frighten, or isolate a person or a group of people by using tactics like lying, name-calling. Gaslighting is a term that's thrown around a lot, but it just means denying someone's perception of reality, what they're hearing with their ears and what they're seeing with their eyes. That's not the reality. The narcissist will kind of claim their own reality and make sure that that one is the one that's accepted and agreed upon. And emotional control also includes serious boundary violations, physical threats, aggressively yelling, and punitive withdrawal of access to basic needs or basic rights. And when we talk about even just the numbers of how to identify this in families, I was really struck by a large CDC study that was done during the pandemic in 2021. This was almost 8,000 high school students were surveyed, and they started by defining emotional abuse as a pattern of being yelled at, put down, and degraded by a parent or caregiver in your home. 55% of high school students in the United States reported that they had experienced emotional abuse from a caregiver in their household. So that part, and again, that doesn't mean that all of these parents have narcissistic personality disorder at all, but it's also just to really start to understand how pervasive these tactics are in terms of using certain strategies to get compliance and to get obedience within a household. It's very common.
Now, I know that having grown up myself in a dysfunctional family, family members tend to adapt themselves to the dysfunction or contort themselves in different ways. How do individuals adapt themselves to a narcissistic parent, for example?
Yeah, that's adaptation. I think so much as a psychologist about adaptation that we are all trying our very best to adapt to whatever environment is thrown at us. And I think in narcissistic, if we think about this from a family systems approach, a lot of others have worked to look at the different roles. So the classic ones would be the golden child. So this is the child that's used to kind of prop up the narcissist's self-image and say, look at us, look how successful this child is. That means I'm a successful person and I'm a successful parent. In narcissism, there's insufficient separation between child and adult. And so the child is seen as a mirror for the adult. And so we try to kind of parade out a child that is maybe physically attractive, smart, or succeeding at school in some way. That's doing what the parent is asking of them. That might be the golden child. Another one could be the scapegoat, or the truth teller, the person that's saying, hey, something's not adding up here. Something isn't feeling right here. I don't know if what you're telling me is actually true. The one that's kind of daring to disagree or have a difference in identity or opinion is frequently going to be thrown under the bus and feel separate from the family. Another role will be kind of the forgotten child. That's the one that's learned, let me just stay under the radar and shrink my voice, shrink my needs, and just kind of walk on eggshells and make sure that I'm not causing any trouble. So I think there's many different ways to adapt. There certainly would be the fixers that are trying to make sure the environment is as calm as possible so that nothing is setting off the parent with maybe anger issues or explosivity or impulsivity. So I think there's many, many different ways that children learn to adapt. And some of them also become narcissistic themselves from that modeling and just from the wounds that they experienced through this parenting style. Narcissism I just see as a defense mechanism. It's not an evil thing. It's not a bad thing. It can cause a lot of harm and bad things, but I fundamentally just see it as a coping mechanism to protect oneself from shame.
And what sort of tools do you give your clients to deal with this if they're still living in a home with a parent or they're still coping with the after effects?
Yeah. I work exclusively with adults, which makes my job easier because a lot of times the abuse is happening to children, and I really admire my colleagues who work with children who are experiencing trauma. It's twice as hard, that work, because to do trauma recovery, it's very, very helpful to have some level of safety in your current environment. And so just by nature of being an adult, you are safer than a child because you have more power, you have more size, and so that is one piece that makes my job easier, is that I work with adults and we can rely on the safety that an adult has over a child who has more vulnerability. In terms of what we do, I think about different stages, and the first one is just stabilization, to recognize how dysregulating things like narcissistic abuse or other forms of trauma is, and work with that person to figure out what is stabilizing for their nervous system, what is calming, and what feels safe and good inside when that person might have been really habituated to chronic feelings of threat, having to be on guard, having to kind of hold their shoulders up to their ears, bracing for the next explosion or the next uncertain, unpredictable thing coming their way. And part of that stabilization is about building awareness. That psychologists use this phrase a lot: name it to tame it, empowering people with terms that they can define for themselves, understanding what psychological volatility is, understanding, what DARVO is, deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. There's a playbook to narcissistic abuse, and so you can really, as you learn that playbook, turn the unpredictable into the predictable, and that's very soothing for the nervous system. So that's, I think, one of the first steps we would do before entering into active processing of the traumatic experiences.
You recently wrote an article a few months ago in the Huffington Post about this, and you had mentioned that you have a patient who uses flashcards when they're dealing with their abusive parent or narcissistic parent so that they can identify the different tactics. Can you talk about that? It just seems so cool to me.
I love me some flashcards. From just neurobiological standpoint, in terms of why I like the flashcards, and I'm going to be oversimplifying our brain, but we have a right hemisphere, we have a left hemisphere. Right hemisphere is known as more of the emotion center of the brain, left hemisphere more as that verbal, linguistic part. And when we're triggered, these parts of our brains aren't communicating as smoothly and as quickly with each other. We're going to have the limbic system, that fight or flight, that amygdala, that part of the brain take over, and more of these emotion centers take over. So flashcards for me are just this visual, tactile thing that my clients will have in their purses and their bags and be able to take out and immediately start activating that left side, that hemisphere that has gotten a bit disconnected from the emotion side. And then that crosstalk can happen where we're not avoiding the emotion or suppressing the emotion, but being able to stay with the emotion by what's called sportscasting, just naming and describing what this person is experiencing. And especially if they've experienced narcissistic abuse, which can include so much gaslighting and kind of denying that person's reality, the flashcards are really just kind of fact-based. This is what's happening, and I know how to identify it now. So with the client that I mentioned in that article, we collaborated together, and she created actually this card deck. It's a beautiful card deck. She used ChatGPT to help create these images of Queen of, with the heart, the diamond, the spade. She had it look just like a deck of cards. So that were things like Queen of pity me, and Queen of perform niceness, Queen of attack, Queen of denial. And she would get sometimes 100, 200 texts from her mother. And they were all over the place, including really scary components like, I just got out of the hospital, I am having heart issues, I need tennis shoes in order to start exercise so that I can solve my heart issues. Can you lend me $40 for the shoes? And then, but 100 more texts, attacking the client, calling her names. It's a lot of information to sort through and process. And so the flashcards help her just categorize and say, oh, here we are. This is Queen of Attack card coming out, and we're just going to place it right there and visually put it in front of herself. And that really protects her nervous system from absorbing it, because we're all human. So even if we can say, this isn't completely adding up, when we hear those words without the flashcard as a buffer, it still enters into the limbic system and can cause that reactivity. So to slow it down and say, let me filter this through a more accurate lens of what's actually happening and protect my nervous system from some of this fallout.
Now, you've probably studied narcissistic leaders of the past, such as Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and so forth.
Yeah.
What was particularly narcissistic about them or about the systems that they created?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a playbook, right? So, I think the first is just to start with the charm. I think that is important to recognize. I think a lot of Democrats are over here scratching their heads of like, I don't get it. Like, what is the charm? What is the spell? And to really understand how intelligent narcissists are at understanding at kind of a primal level people's attachment needs. And what I mean by that is attachment needs are these basic fundamental needs we have for belonging, to feel deeply seen, to feel chosen or part of something that has dignity and respect, and to feel connected and attached. And that narcissists are often very keenly aware of what people's unmet needs are. So if you think about things like cultural populism, where you are able to say, hey, you are the forgotten ones, and I am remembering you, and I can see your needs that this other party over here has disregarded and has forgotten. being able to speak emotionally to that is much more powerful than speaking intellectually or academically about that. So I think Mussolini, Hitler, they all had this incredible charisma. I one time on a student visa got to meet Fidel Castro. I was really struck by his charisma, his ability to work a crowd and just tell stories about himself as a boy riding a tricycle with his mother, that really are captivating, and they often are incredible storytellers. So I would say that's the hook, the first part. It doesn't start with abuse and control and degradation. It starts with how do you accumulate a fan base, and how do you get that admiration as the fuel to keep the power propped up.
Now, in that same article in HuffPo, you wrote, and I'll quote, the same patterns that destabilize families destabilize democracies. Speaking of narcissism, of course. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I was born in 1982, and my lifetime has been in the United States a relative period of stability for our government. If you think across time, right? You mentioned Hitler and Mussolini. When we talk about abusive regimes, like they are as old as agriculture, right? Dating back to 3000 BC, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. This is these patterns that we're seeing now are a part of history. They're repetitive, but I think a lot of people living in this country actually don't have tactile connection to authoritarianism. Maybe their grandparents, great-grandparents survived the Holocaust, or for me, I'm Chinese, and so certainly have relatives that were affected by the Cultural Revolution and Mao in China. But a lot of Americans don't have that deep personal experience with authoritarianism, and I think combined with that exceptionalism of we're invincible and we're number one as Americans, it gives us that false sense of protection. And so where I was going with that article was saying, people don't have that personal experience of authoritarianism in their government yet. Many people probably actually do have, without knowing it, have had authoritarian parenting in their home environments, and that the same emotional control techniques are used on a microcosm in the family system, and then you just blow it up and you can create it in a government system. So I was hoping through that piece to be able to connect those dots for people so that they could have more personal experiences and identify this isn't just this academic, abstract concept of authoritarianism that is distant and what political scientists and historians, that's only the business of them. It's, this is deeply personal. And this is an opportunity to start setting better boundaries in your home life that I think will actually generalize to what we can do as citizens to protect our Constitution and some of these democratic institutions.
Now, let me quote again from that article. You say narcissistic control in government thrives on flipping the script and silencing watchdogs. Can you comment about that?
Yeah, flipping the script, I think what is so important about building awareness of these techniques is they are deliberately shocking and confusing, and they really break these implicit social norms we have around more or less trying to tell the truth. Everyone does white lies from time to time, but a narcissist is using lying in a much more spectacular manner. You referenced Hitler, for example, and the chief propagandist Goebbels, has a lot of written work on emotional control, and he's saying that the bigger the lie, the more it's going to be believed, because we have these social norms saying, no way, this person can't be lying about the fact that they have this rare form of cancer, or this person can't be lying about the fact that XYZ, it's too big for our brains to process that this could be untrue, right? And so they go for the big hitting items that really play on social psychology, where we're really trained to reject information if we think it's too big to be fabricated, right? And so that was of part of what I was getting to in that piece right there.
Mm. Well, so now we come to the $50 question. Over the past 10 years, I've read interviews with, or extracts of interviews from psychiatrists and psychologists who describe Donald Trump as a narcissist. In fact, in some ways, it seems as a country that we've just sort of grown used to it. We just kind of accept it now. What is it about Trump that screams narcissism?
Yes, and this is where I have to do my disclosure as a mental health professional that I cannot diagnose any public officials without personal assessment. But in terms, if we think of this as a trait instead of a diagnosis, oh gosh, I think sometimes it's good to bring the humor into this, and that's where in that article I talked about just the big $45 million parade. So the birthday parade, right? So that is almost a humorous form of narcissism, right? When you need that pomp and circumstance to celebrate your 79th birthday, there's a grandiosity to it that is pretty front and center, and I think really Trump supporters will readily agree to that grandiosity and the fun in it that he has a fan base that's really enjoying that grandeur, right? But everything from the Trump hotels and the gilded, branding is really a hallmark signature where that image again. I would say one of the key concepts in narcissism is saving face is central. So really protecting that image of wealth and success and riches. That's going to be a really important part to maintaining that image for many narcissists. There's a huge range, of course. Some are more covert, but yeah, he really likes to show it. He doesn't hide it. It's not very covert.
You say that narcissists like Trump hold power by keeping us off balance or in a state of what you call psychological whiplash. How does that work?
Yeah, and actually that goes back to your question on the just flip-flopping and flipping the script as well. And I'm actually, I'll go back to that flipping the script piece there because flipping the script is very destabilizing when you are told up is down, down is right. I mean, I think George Orwell really nailed it with his war is peace, ignorance is strength. It is, it does funny things to our brain. And we try to make sense. We're meaning makers. And so when we're given disparate information or the big lie that's too big to be a lie, we do funny contortions in our brain to try to make it make sense, try to make it have meaning to us. And all of that kind of scrambles us up and can feel very discombobulating and get us off center. So, one big piece that I'm working with my clients on always is starting really simple, just reconnecting to their bodies, because you can feel it. We distract ourselves from our bodies and we kind of glue ourselves to our phones and we try to keep up with all the information that's coming at us, but our bodies are having a response and our bodies are very intelligent. They have a lot of knowledge. And so just starting to detect for yourself, like, how do I know when I'm feeling off balanced? And instead of straining to try to make sense of this nonsensical information, I want to just pause and check in. and notice, why does my chest feel tight right now while I'm reading this information? Why are my ears going up? My shoulders going up to my ears? Why is my heart feeling funny right now? Those are all signs of disorientation, dysregulation. Why did I not breathe in the last 60 seconds, right? And having all of us just pay a little bit more attention to how these tactics and how these informations are affecting all of us.
So how do we, as people, how do we combat this? How do we avoid just adjusting and becoming just a part of the system? How do we save our democracy?
Mm-hmm.
Big questions.
I know the answer to that. You tell me, SJ. Yeah, I've been really asking myself that question. And up until recently, honestly, I have felt very helpless and just, who am I? I'm just an ordinary citizen. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political scientist. I don't run a radio like yourself, right? Who am I? I think so many of us are asking that question of what in the world can we do when there's just so much devastation, happening around us and so much chaos. And I think I really believe that every single person on this planet has a voice, and we start using that voice where we can. And we protect institutions like radio that is allowing people to find their voice. So for me, as a psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse, one of my voices is, to your question, is let's get everyone in this country really versed in the fight or flight system, which is not just fight and flight, where you can feel it in your body. It's also freeze. So I would say from the beginning of the first 100 days of the second Trump administration, I was more in the freeze response. And then there's fawn, which includes trying to rush in and fix things too quickly, trying to accommodate and adapt, as you said, so that we can try to reduce immediate threat, but then sometimes in that fawn response, we're actually prolonging long-term status quo. And it also includes flop, where we're kind of catatonic and we just don't want to get out of bed. So understanding everyone usually gravitates a little bit towards one or the other. Are you a fighter? Are you a flopper? Are you a freezer? Really having deep compassion for this nervous system reactivity that all of us are feeling in some way, some form. And then that gives us information from there. I think starting there will inform everyone individually and collectively, okay, what might be my next step once I can recognize and kind of identify what the impact is on starting just at the nervous system level.
I think of, from your article, you talk about another client who was dealing with a narcissistic sibling who was abusing the mother who was elderly, I think. And you described how she, I think it was a she, just kind of stood up and said, no, this is not right. And then was, of course, immediately smacked down, blamed,
Yes.
Victim blamed and this sort of thing. But then, when she recovered, she continued just to continue to reflect the truth and speak reality until finally, eventually, I don't know how long it took, but well, I'll let you tell the story because I just told the whole thing, but why don't you tell it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and this is why I think understanding that playbook is so important, because the narcissist is so well versed in. One of the impressive traits of the narcissist is persistence. So they are typically just, I don't know what it is, but they're incredibly persistent, and they can kind of outdo most people and just kind of fatigue the other person. And so the playbook helped my client understand okay, if I set a boundary, there's going to be backlash. The script is going to be flipped, and instead of the person that's actually doing the abuse, that person is going to deflect blame and say, no, you are the unstable one, you are the problem. So that's move number one. So it's deny the abuse that I am doing, and then immediately attack the person that is speaking the truth. That's playing that role of the truth teller, right? And so she could predict that, and that helps regulate. You take it less personally when you say, oh yeah, okay, here we go. We pressed play on this playbook, and now we're going, and now we have to go into this really yucky, unpleasant stage. And that's where, having a therapist, having social support does help, because no one should do any of this truth-telling work alone. It's very isolating and can be unsafe. So you want to build up that social support in some way, shape, or form. And then what she had learned in therapy as well is that classic number one technique in working with narcissistic abuse, which is called broken record, which is you gotta start. I never want to play harmful tactics. So I say it's so tempting to try to meet harm with harm. It's a losing battle. It never ends well. So you don't want to mimic those tactics, but there are other less harmful tactics that you can mimic, and one of them is the broken record, where you outdo their outdoing. And so when you just stay really consistent and you don't bat an eyelash and you say, got it, I hear that you're calling me unstable, and this is the boundary that needs to happen now. You need to move out of this home because there is elder abuse happening in this home. This is what needs to happen next. And she just kept repeating it over and over, and she kept to one message only. You cannot get fancy. That's the grief part of this work, is you gotta actually let go of a lot of other priorities. You have to let go a sense of fairness, a sense of being vindicated, or like the narcissist suddenly saying, oh, I get it, yeah, my bad. You're never going to get that sense of satisfaction. So you have to let go of a lot of other priorities and just stick with the one or two that are most important to you. And no matter what they're throwing at you, you stay, this is also called gray rocking. You don't get yanked into defending yourself of like, I'm not the unstable one, you are, right? That's just a waste of energy. And you just keep saying, okay, this is what has to happen. No, this is not okay. This is not okay to happen. She actually didn't have to use legal supports, but in many family systems, you do end up having to use legal supports as well. So that would be, calling elder abuse agencies, child protective services, having a lawyer that, and going through that channel. The law is really meant to protect things from things like abuse. So that is another boundary that for some they will have to use.
I just think of your client with the flashcards, and I see myself sitting in front of the television watching Fox News and the president's speech and going through thumbing through my flashcards and saying, okay, which one is this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could make bingo cards. We also have to find some joy and humor. I think that's the other, as a trauma therapist, it's really taught me the importance of joy, because it can feel really dark. We're really kind of going into the dark parts that we all want to pretend don't exist, and we all want to brush under the rug, and it's unpleasant, and that's why we avoid, and avoidance is an adaptation, right? Children really need to learn how to avoid certain things. Dissociation, right, is a form of avoidance. That's a very protective, adaptive adaptation for a child to figure out, so that they're limiting the impact of the abuse on their little systems, right? But when we want to confront and be truth tellers and actually set the correct boundaries as adults, it's gritty work. And so anyway, I also want to always remember to have some fun with this. And sometimes these flashcards, again, my client actually had a blast with these flashcards and bringing her creativity to it. These flashcards are like they're colorful. There's animations on them. They're really fun, and it completely changes how she interacts with her mom now.
Well, we've been talking with Dr. Jocelyn Sze, who is a psychologist and a assistant professor at UC Berkeley, and she specializes in trauma and also in narcissism. We've been talking about narcissism in terms of family systems and how that plays out on the national level. It's a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. And I think what we can do is maybe link your article in HuffPo. People could read it at length because it's so helpful and so encouraging. I found it encouraging. So thank you so much for making time for us and sharing your wisdom and expertise.
Oh, SJ, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for providing this platform for all of the people that you are reaching right now.
Well, thank you again for helping, and thank you all of you who tuned in to listen. And this is SJ Munson signing off.